Book 3, Chapter 64. Uncaused Brahma creates rules of causation or forms. Vasishtha reasoned. The Supreme Deity is the all-pervading Spirit and the great God and Lord of all. He is without beginning or end and is identical with the infinite bliss of his translucent self-reflection. So who is Vasishtha referring to in this statement? Who is this Supreme Deity? If we look at our lexicon, we have Brahma, the supreme being in this universe, a being that has achieved Brahman consciousness, someone who is witnessing from the level of the divine silent witness, someone who appreciates his existence as the eternal servant of Krishna. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, these eternal servants are referred to as gopis and gopas. But right away we see that's not one, that's many. So this Supreme Deity, without beginning or end, eternal, identical with the infinite bliss of his translucent self-reflection. So this is Shiva Krishna. It's difficult, perhaps, not even possible, to separate Shiva and Krishna into two things. And Shiva is pure, unmanifest being. Krishna is pure, manifest, omnipresent, omnipotent expression of the unmanifest being. And the seeming two is really just one. There's only one Supreme Deity, and that is Shiva Krishna. Well, this is who we're talking about here. And Vasishtha does refer to this from time to time, and then takes one step beyond and begins dealing with relative manifestation. So he's going to start us off here at the supreme level of Shiva Krishna. Verse 2. It is from this supreme joy and purely intellectual substance that the individual soul and mind have their rise before their production of the universe. So that sets up a wonderful question from Ram, who asks, how could the self-reflection of Brahma as the infinite spirit and one without a second, conceive in it a finite individual soul other than itself, and which is not in being. So this is really the fundamental question. How does the jiva arise? And we've referred to this in a few different ways. Now we're going to study it even more. Jiva is perhaps like a cell or just a bubble of the supreme deity, all-pervading spirit. It would be good to have another perspective on what the jiva is, and this is what Ram is asking. How is it even possible that a jiva could arise from this all-pervading spirit and great God and Lord of all, who is without beginning or end and is identical with this infinite bliss of his translucent self-reflection? Infinite bliss is translucent self-reflection. Very, very beautiful way to understand Shiva Krishna. Vashishta replied, the immense and transparent spirit of Brahman remained in a state of non-existence, asat, a state of ineffable bliss, as seen by the adept yogi, but as of formidable vastness, as conceived by the uninitiated novice. This state of supreme bliss, ever tranquil and full with the pure essence of God, is altogether indefinable and incomprehensible, even by the most proficient in divine knowledge. Now this is Shiva. 6. Thence springs a power, an aspect. So from Shiva arises a power, an aspect, like the germ of a seed, possessed of consciousness and energy, which is called the living and conscious soul, and which must last until its final liberation. And what is the final liberation of this germ of seed possessed of consciousness and energy? It is slipping back into that pure consciousness of Shiva. Some have said it's like a drop of water falling in the air, like a raindrop, and finally it merges with the ocean. Cannot be found again. There's only one ocean, vast body of water, bliss. And when the individual jiva merges with that ocean, it ceases to exist, doesn't it? The vast empty sphere of this being's clear mirror of the mind reflects images of innumerable worlds set above one another, like statues engraved upon. The vast empty sphere of this being's clear mirror of the mind reflects images of innumerable worlds as set above one another like statues engraved upon. This is the expression of Shiva as Krishna. Brahma know that the individual soul is an extension of divine spirit. Like the swelling of the sea and the burning of a candle when its flame is unshaken by the wind. The individual soul is possessed of a finite awareness as distinguished from the clear and calm consciousness of the divine spirit. Its vitality is the nature of the living God, but is only a flash of the empty consciousness of Brahman. So now we're getting to the true essence of the jiva. The jiva is an expression, a separation into individuality, into existence of Shiva Krishna. The vitality is Krishna. Vitality is the essential property of the soul. So now we see how the thing begins to emerge. What is vitality? We're soon going to be having the Sanskrit available to us. It is being recorded now by Pandit Narayana Tapti. He is a professional Pandit trained by Maharishi, and he's going to be recording the entire Yoga Vashishta for us in Sanskrit. So we're going to be able to go into the original Sanskrit and examine how these English words have been derived. I suspect when we look into this particular verse, 10, we're going to find that this vitality is a word similar to sattva. Sattva is the purity guna, or action property in the relative universe. Sattva is derived from sat. Sattva emerges from sat. Sat is eternal. Sattva is the first expression of the eternal. So the jiva arises as a individual soul that comes into existence as sattva, vitality. So vitality gives us the sense of pure potentiality for creation. And this is the essential property of the soul. Resembling the inseparable properties of motion in wind, warmth in fire, and coldness in ice. When we forget the nature of divine consciousness and spirit, our self-consciousness leaves us with a knowledge of ourselves. And this is called the individual soul. So this is a very interesting verse as well. When we forget, what is forgetting? Forgetting is making a mistake. It's letting go of what is known, letting go of what is real. So this is basically another way to express pragya parad, the mistake of the intellect. So again, we are reinforced with this understanding that it is the mistake of the intellect or the forgetfulness of the nature of divine consciousness that results in existence, separation, and then the fall into manifestation. When sattva emerges from this particle of pure consciousness, if we could call it a particle or a bubble of pure consciousness, when sattva emerges from the pure consciousness, then it's only the beginning. And from this mistake of the intellect, a momentum is imparted. It's like when the bubble emerges from pure consciousness, it bursts forth. It explodes onto the scene. It doesn't just lazily emerge, because it emerges with vitality. So when the jiva is formed initially, when existence appears for this individual soul, it is like an explosion. I'm tempted to call it the Big Bang, but then we would get into this whole theory of physics that has some basis of truth, because that's the way the creator of our universe, who is a jiva, who is not different from who we are, that's how this existence began as an explosion, like emergence of the individual from pure consciousness. And then, as explosions want to do, they just expand. That's what makes the noise of an explosion. That is the expansion of whatever it is that is exploding, impacting on the atmosphere and creating like a sonic boom. You know, in our atmosphere, if we move something that has mass faster than the speed of sound, about 700 miles an hour, there's this big vibration that starts. The atmosphere is a sonic boom. This is a little bit of a problem in air travel. They do have planes occasionally that come up. There was one many years ago. Now it looks like they're making another one. We travel at supersonic speeds. It's problematic because when the plane crosses the sound barrier, it creates quite a disturbance in the environment. People on the ground and in the plane are having this experience of the sonic boom. It's like an explosion. Sounds like an explosion. So that's what really happens. As the jiva forms, it's not just some little gentle emergence of a little bubble of consciousness. It is literally an explosion. An explosion of a bubble of consciousness. Makes quite a ruckus. Verse 11. When we forget the nature of divine consciousness and spirit, our self-consciousness leaves us with a knowledge of ourselves, and this is called the individual soul. It is by means of this positive consciousness that we know our egoism or self-existence. Positive consciousness is an interesting way of denoting that this is consciousness that is standing out of consciousness. It is separate. It is existent. And immediately, this positive consciousness becomes the ego, doesn't it? And the ego, we know, is false. It is just a reflection or expression of individual karmic traces. So the pragya-parad, the stake of the intellect, creates the original individual karmic trace. And this is our objective, actually, to balance the karmic traces, which are created serially in time, the illusion of time, but time is also created at the moment of the explosion, the vitality expression of pure consciousness that creates the jiva. The moment that jiva is created, then time begins for that particular bubble of consciousness. And so with time begins also egoism and self-existence. I am separate from the wholeness. I exist. It strikes us more glaringly than a spark of fire and enlightens us to the knowledge of ourselves more than any other light. So the pondering of this particular mistake of the intellect is very important, according to Vishishta, this statement. He says it enlightens us to the knowledge of ourselves more than any other So the pragya prad is the ultimate final karmic trace that we have to balance. Why don't we focus on this? Why don't we just put all of our attention on pragya prad? Well, we could do that, but it's the nature of karmic traces to balance when they come into focus in awareness. And this essential mistake of the intellect, arising like an explosion from pure consciousness, full of vitality. Vitality means it is itching to create. It wants to create everything. It wants to become Krishna. So the jiva, when the jiva emerges as this explosion of Shiva, the first and only thing on its mind, as it were, is to become Krishna. This jiva wants to become Krishna. Not knowing, of course, that it already is. Because as soon as this bubble of individual soul emerges, the Maya begins. The illusion begins. The illusion that it can become Krishna begins. So this is like the primordial illusion as well. The jiva emerges with the agenda. The agenda is built into the ego. That's what the ego does. It sets agendas. So the jiva emerges with the agenda to become Krishna. Now we're taking a lot of emphasis on this beginning of the jiva. But we have to realize we're dealing with a realm that is beyond this universe. The jiva is actually emerging, appearing, bursting onto the scene in the absolute realm, in a place that is beyond time. So we have to understand that this jiva with the vitality and agenda to become Krishna is one of the eternal companions of Krishna right now. So this jiva is a gopi or a gopa in the loka. So it didn't emerge as some amorphous bubble without any characteristics and features. When it burst onto the scene as the individual soul, it burst onto the scene as a gopi, an eternal companion of Krishna. Now, the gopi is the female companion of Krishna. And for the children, we also say there are gopas, male companions of Krishna. but there aren't really any gopas. It's just like, sorry, there really isn't Santa Claus. There aren't any gopas. We are all gopis. So this is a fundamental understanding that has to arise in the mind at some point. It has to arise in the awareness. There's only Krishna and his eternal companions, and his eternal companions are his creative expressions, and these are the gopis. And when we finally get into our universe and we're dealing with the female physiology, that's the essence of it. It is the aspect that is creative. So this jiva, as it bursts onto the scene, doesn't really burst onto the scene at all. It's kind of like the story of the gopas. It's sort of told this way so that we can have a bit of ability to relate to it. Because unless we have finally merged with Krishna, and we are Krishna, and we're looking through the eyes of Krishna, then we really need some help. We need some fairy tales to connect us to the reality, to the truth. We need a Santa Claus. We need a gopa. The question arises, jiva was born so early, does it mean there exists 780 millions of jivas to balance one and the same jiva? Yes. Now this is a curious way to look at this, and we can look at it this way. Actually, billions is what I think the individual wanted to type instead of millions. I'm not sure. 780 millions, which would be 7.8 billion. 7,800 millions. Yes. Well, yes. We say that each person, each individual walking around on Earth has within a divine spark, and that divine spark is the jiva. And that is true. We have to look back even further to this whole concept of Krishna and the gopis. We're going to just drop the facade of the gopas now. Santa Claus doesn't really exist. We're older now. We understand. So we have Krishna and the gopis, and each one of us, we could say, is one of Krishna's gopis. I'm a gopi. Bonnie's a gopi. Kevin's a gopi. Angela's a gopi. Shreyam's a gopi. Ashit's a gopi. We're all gopis. In the absolute realm of Goloka. In Goloka, there only exists Krishna and his eternal companions. And they're spoken of that way. in Srimad Bhagavatam, we often speak of Radha and Krishna. Radha is the representative of all the gopis. Radha is not one gopi, Radha is all the gopis. So there's really only two beings that exist in Goloka, and that's Radha and Krishna. So if you want to really get technical about it, I am Radha, Tapani is Radha, Kevin is Radha, Shriyan is Radha, Angela is Radha, Ashit is Radha. There's only Radha. This is the importance and significance of pondering or performing sanyama on the esoteric Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Rama. Rama is Radha. It's basically the sutra for Pragyapara. Only it has kind of a nicer sound than Pragyapara. But that's what the esoteric Mahamantra is. When we're thinking the esoteric Mahamantra, Sanyama, the esoteric Mahamantra, it's connecting us to that ultimate mystery, the eternal nature of Radha, as the eternal companion of Krishna without beginning. Now we're getting into a very deep concept. And what we have done is we have taken this whole notion of the jiva, we've elevated it to being Radha, the eternal companion of Krishna. And we're moving in the direction of annihilating our individual existence in this process, approaching Krishna consciousness, approaching moksha level 5. Moksha level 5 is extraordinarily beyond Brahman consciousness in all aspects, because we have to come to grips with an understanding of eternity. Pretty easy to understand something that lives for 311.04 trillion years, because there's a boundary there. So we get comfortable with that. In Brahman consciousness, I am Brahma, I am the creator of this universe, and I exist for 311.04 trillion years. I have a lifespan. I have a boundary. Now we have to go beyond that, don't we? Can't stop there. And that's what we're doing now. We're going beyond that. And that's what Vasishtha's doing with his statements, taking us beyond that. He's showing us the fallacy of the jiva. He's showing us the illusion of the jiva, that the jiva Yes, the jiva exists. The jiva burst onto the scene as a bubble of vitality, exploded onto the scene. But really, it never did. Because we have traced the jiva back to Radha, and Radha is the eternal companion of Krishna. Never was there a time when Radha did not exist. Just as never was there a time that Krishna did not exist, and never was there a time when Radha was not the eternal companion of Krishna. So always, this has always been, this always is. And you are Radha. This takes you at least one step closer. Your ego gets at least the ability to maintain itself as existing for a little bit longer as Radha. Verse 13. When we look up to heaven and we see a blue vault, beyond which our eyes have no power to pierce. In the same way, when we inquire into the nature of soul, we cannot see beyond the consciousness of ourselves. And this is really the predicament that we all find ourselves in when we burst forth, and we never did burst forth, but the illusion of us burst forth from pure consciousness as Radha. We cannot see beyond that consciousness of Radha. This creates a question. We perceive a boundary to our consciousness. And we want to know immediately what's on the other side. What's beyond that boundary? There's a boundary here. I want to know what's over there. So this is the essence of yearning, seeking for self-realization. Our knowledge of the soul is presented to us in the form of an ego, yes, that is known by its thoughts, yes, expressions of the karmic traces, like the empty sky appearing as a blue sphere because of the clouds, the karmic traces. So see, we're confined in this. When Radha emerged, and always Radha has existed, so it's an oxymoron to say Radha emerged from Krishna. In the Bible, it talks about how God created Adam or Eve from the rib of Adam. Eve emerged from Adam. Radha emerged from Krishna. There's parallels there. As soon as that occurred, there was this limitation perceived in consciousness, and the desire to eliminate that limitation arose.